What's going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Melito. It's a mobile episode from the Mobile Studio 2.0, so I'm going to do an abbreviated bio, and I'm going to work on doing a new plug-in bio for regular shows, I think, after talking to one of the patrons in person. So let's try that today. Make it a little bit more succinct. First and foremost, I'm a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. That is number one in everything that I do. This podcast is no different. I've been blessed by God to get through many things in life, still breathing. 2 combat tours in Iraq in the United States Marine Corps as an assaultman. Also served as an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. Also served in the U.S. Army primary MOS of infantry. Also been a private contractor for one of the 3-letter government agencies. And that's all I really say about that. Also law enforcement. Did several years in law enforcement, LAPD, also did some work for some other 3-letter government agencies. In that role, worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I'm also an FBI certified firearms instructor, NRA certified firearms instructor, and work for one of the very large private industry firearm shooting schools in the U.S. Been blessed by God with a great talent for shooting. Been a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional rifle champion several times, and won more shooting competitions than I can remember. Also competed in a lot of other disciplines. Won't get into that unless it happens to be pertinent to the show. Hunted since I was a boy. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer and elk on the West Coast. And all manner of beasts of the field I've been able to slay and eat, which I'm very blessed. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. But the most important thing is that I'm a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. With that, let's talk apocalypse loadouts. Plan B. I got some good feedback on the apocalypse loadouts number 1 about the main long gun. Let's talk about your plan B, right? Because you probably have a sidearm, a primary tool, and your backup tool. Now, day-to-day concealed carry, I encourage all you men out there, all you gunfighters, alpha males, to be armed. However, you have to realize that we carry handguns because it's allowed and it's acceptable and it's not inconvenient. It would be hard to go through most people's day-to-day life with an AR slung on their shoulder or a Mossberg 590 slung on their shoulder, right? Working out in the garden with a 590 on your shoulder, that'd get pretty inconvenient after a time. So we carry handguns because we can have them on us at the ready. We don't carry them because they're their best stopping implement, right? We just don't. We have them to get us out of sticky situations. If you said that you were going to get into a gunfight today and you could not avoid it, like you had to, like it was an active shooter and you were going to be there and people's lives depended on you being able to save the day, like women and children and widows and orphans, they were relying on you to stop that threat. You would never pick a handgun for that scenario, right? You would pick a long gun, you'd pick a rifle or a shotgun depending on the distance, but you would never pick a handgun. A handgun is there because you just don't have the opportunity or you don't have the ability to have a rifle. So let's get that out of the way. But even if you have a long gun, you should probably have a handgun. If you're talking about apocalypse, if you're talking about zombies or, Red Dawn, Cuban paratroopers jumping out of the sky and peeing in radiators and all kinds of shenanigans. If you're talking about like Book of Eli, wandering through the wasteland to get the last copy of the King James Bible to, San Francisco, I think? Anyway, whatever your version that you're picturing of the apocalypse is, you are wandering the wasteland looking for Twinkies. Whatever you think the version of the apocalypse is going to be, hopefully not The Road. That's a super sad apocalypse movie, right? But perhaps, maybe, sadly, one of the most realistic, but very sad. Whatever you picture that to be, whatever you're going through the apocalypse with, you're probably not carrying a gun cabinet, with cargo straps on your back with just, a half a dozen long guns at the ready. You got to probably pick one long gun. And you're probably going to have a long gun and a handgun. So we talked about apocalypse loadouts. Number 1, you might want to go listen to that one if you haven't. But this could be a standalone. But let's say, what's your plan B? Your backup tool, your handgun, your sidearm of choice. And I'm going to talk about what I think some people would consider their go-tos. Like some of the most popular, just being in this community and in this, guys, in all the years I've been around the guns and the gun culture and the survivalist community. What are some people's top choices? And we're going to talk about pros and cons. Let's start with the old school. The old school, like, go-to warhorse. Yes, the 1911. That's battle-proven. What's the meme tagline? The two-time World War II champion. You're going to go with the 1911. Well, because it was good enough in Korea, and by golly, it's good enough for me. Now, I love 1911s. That was one of my duty guns. I showed one of the patrons today that I was blessed to meet traveling across country. One of my old duty guns, the Colt M45A1. Fantastic gun. Great gun. And sometimes, even though I had like double stack STIs, depending on the mission, I would choose to carry that M45A1. Nobody argues with the 45's effectiveness. It is effective. The 9mm I'd say is equally effective, but that doesn't make the 45 not effective, right? They can be both effective, and I say that they are effective. The 9mm is a proven now defensive round with caveat, and here's where the rub comes in, right? With good defensive ammo that's proven out of your gun and your barrel length, for you. So, the 147 grain Ranger Tees, that's my go-to. That's my baby load for usually what I'll start out with, unless I have an issue with it. Also, the 115, the 124s, the 147 Spear Gold Dots. They're proven, street-proven rounds. With those rounds, I would say that is about as effective as anything else as far as handguns, semi-automatic handguns anyway, go for stopping power. However, you may not be able to get that kind of premium ammo, or you may not be able to stockpile a legit amount of that ammo. So if you're talking ball rounds, if you're talking ball to ball, right, you're talking 230 grain, which is by far the most common. 230 grain versus 115 grain, which is almost certainly the most common 9mm load. It's twice the ball. It's got twice the ball. All right, it's twice as heavy. 230 grain versus 115 grain, literally twice the mass. And if you're talking just straight Full Metal Jacket rounds, which is what ball means, right? If you're talking that, the 45 is more effective. There is no doubt. You said you have to shoot a ball round, and you have to pick one. I'm certainly going to pick the 45, because in a ball round configuration, it's better. Okay. Some other pluses. We're going to talk about the pluses and then the minuses. Okay, so that's a big plus. If you're shooting ball rounds, 45 and semi-auto cartridges, at least common ones, that's legit. That's the most effective one in ball rounds, in my opinion. It's proven. It's also got good penetration because it's a ball round and it's heavy and it's at a moderate velocity, so it's going to penetrate well and not deviate off course a lot in barriers. It's going to be good for that, right? So you got that plus. Also, the 1911 itself. The 1911 is a proven design. If you get a good, well-built one, and I would say Colt or one of the older STIs or something like that, it is a proven design. There's a lot of manufacturers of them. I would stick with Colt, or I would stick with a really, really well-proven one. And if you know how to tune them and you know when they're starting to go bad and change springs and stuff, they are as reliable. If you know how to tune one, they can be, in my experience, just as reliable as a Glock. Yes, I said it. With neglect and large rounds counts, not so much, but they can be very reliable, and they're proven. And the parts have been around a long time, and they're not the most obscure things to find, right? A Series 70 extractor, a standard 1911 45 extractor is not hen's teeth, right? You can find them. Also, the parts that generally go and need to be tuned are small and light and handy. If you're going to carry one of these, you could probably fit some of those in like a film canister, one of those old, I guess I'm dating myself. Do people even have those anymore, the old film canisters? Let's say a pill bottle. You could throw it in there with a pill bottle and some ballastol and have a bunch of spare parts in there, and it won't be super heavy. So not a big deal there. It's a proven design, and here's the big benefit to me. They are one of the most shootable platforms. Like, if you want to get a first, second, third accurate, fast hit on target, the 1911 is legit. It has the trigger of triggers. It is the filet mignon of trigger steaks, right? That's what it is. So if you had to pick a steak, you're probably picking that one. You know, it is good. It's a straight back design, meaning there's no pendulum. It pulls straight back. And if you get a truly, not even great, a decent Series 70 1911 trigger, it is almost like kissing the woman you're going to marry for the first time. You're like, I've been waiting for this. She's the one. Like, you pull that trigger and you're like, this is the trigger. They are phenomenal, which makes them very shootable. And the modern iterations of them, not the old government ones, they tend to have really good, like, Novak style combat legit sights. They are a good shootable gun. Most people, if you just get a moderate shooter, not an expert shooter, but a moderate shooter, and probably not a beginning shooter, because they're not going to know really what to do anyway, but you get a moderate shooter, somebody that goes and shoots once or twice a month, and you give them, let's say, a Glock and a 1911, and you have them shoot for groups, I would say they're almost certainly going to shoot that 1911 better. It's just a easier to shoot gun and be accurate with. So that's the big one for me. Okay, now let's talk about the downsides. They're a heavy gun. If you're talking about the steel, not like the lightweight Commander, but like the full-size one, she's a big girl. She's a heavy girl, right? She's like 40-something ounces. That's a big, heavy gun. And the ammo is heavy. So kind of the same reason we talked about in battle rifles, that the military got away from battle rifles. Big, heavy gun, big, heavy ammo. Also, single stack. You get 7, 8, 9 rounds, maybe 10 rounds if you're talking an extended mag. So even 10 rounds, right? That's not a lot of rounds. And for CCW, it wouldn't really concern me because most of those problems are solved fairly quickly. They're usually down and dirty and quick and nasty, and they're done. There's usually not protracted gunfights, right? You're not John Wicking it. In a post-apocalyptic scenario, you may find yourself with multiple opponents and things like that. And hopefully not. Hopefully that's what your long gun is for. But you may make the argument that that's just not enough capacity for me. So that's one of the other big drawbacks. And another one is, we talked about the ammo and the ball ammo, but here's the deal. How many gunfights do you plan on being in? Like, if you plan on gunfighting day to day, you're probably not going to live that long, right? So you can probably have enough of your go-to duty ammo set aside if you're talking 9 versus 45. Because even though ball ammo in a 45 is better, I'd rather have my go-to load for that is generally the Hornady critical duty. But I would like to have some of those rounds set aside. Because even that's still better than ball, even though the ball is good. And the same with the 9mm. So it's kind of a moot point. You're telling me that you can't have a couple of boxes of your duty ammo set aside, and that's going to be the stuff you pack because it's better? You know, the odds of you going through that in like actual gunfighting and running out of that kind of ammo, I think is way overblown. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to be battlefield picking up NATO ammo. Yeah, maybe, but that's a big maybe, and that's like year 20 of the apocalypse, right? Let's worry about year 1. So, hollow point to hollow point, good proven duty round to good proven duty round, I'd say they're about even as far as the 9mm and the 45. Another big downside we touched on, they need to be tuned, right? So extractors aren't like a Glock extractor. A Glock extractor tends to work until it breaks. But a 1911 extractor should be tuned regularly. Now, if you know how to tune it, not a big deal. Even if you have the same one, they're pretty easy to tune if you know what you're doing. But if you don't, if you're not a sommelier of 1911s, it's probably not the pick for you. I'm going to do a brief aside on people that are like, I love the 45, but the 1911 is not enough capacity for me or whatever. They'll go with the double stack. The Glock 21, the Tactical Wheaties box, the FN 49, or some version thereof, right? The M&P 45, which is a good one. A double stack 45. Okay, well, you're giving up one of the big benefits to me, which is that great trigger of the 1911 and the great shootability. Also, unless you have very large hands, these can be kind of comically big. The worst offender, I think, is like the Mark 23, but that's like a crew-served handgun. Like, it's not the size of most modern general-purpose firearms, and unless you have really big, I would say much larger than average hands, it's not going to fit you correctly. Not saying you can't shoot it. I carried a Glock 21 on duty for a while, but that was before I really knew what it meant to have a proper fitting handgun. And I think for most people, they're too big to actually fit properly. If you have really large hands, not an issue. But again, you're giving up that great shootability for capacity. And also, the guns may be lighter. A Glock 21 is almost certainly quite a bit lighter than the 1911. But the ammo still isn't any lighter. So, you got that. Now, let's talk about what's probably the most common, the most ubiquitous. The Glock 19, and I'm going to lump in the Glock 17. Not a super subcompact, right? Because you're not trying to conceal carry at Target, right? With all the soccer moms walking around. It's the apocalypse, right? You may conceal carry from time to time, but you probably got a jacket on or something. You're probably not walking through the apocalypse in a wife beater and board shorts. So, a decent size fighting handgun. I'd say the very bottom of that range is the Glock 19, Glock 17, but the Glock-ish family, right? So let's talk about those. Probably the most common. What are the big benefits? Okay, battle proven. They've been around since the 80s. They are battle proven war horses. They are like the AK of handguns. As far as reliability goes, you want the gun that you can throw in a porta potty and come back a week later and retrieve it, and it's probably going to work. You're probably talking Glock, right? You're talking they're fairly lightweight for the capacity and everything that you get. It's a very thin steel slide. It is polymer frame, lightweight, robust, very impervious. Whatever kind of crazy chemistry the Glock people do on their slides, they are, I wouldn't say completely impervious to rust, but they are very, very rust resistant, very element resistant. A lot of people think you can shoot them underwater, and you can, caveat, if you have maritime spring cups in there. But if you don't expect to do that. That's a lot of people just think they can do that because they have a Glock and they saw a Glock do it. But maritime spring cups are a thing. But let's just say they are very good in adverse conditions. I will give the Glock that, right? Next one, they're in 9mm. 9mm is like the standard de facto go-to round, right? Everybody uses it. We use it. The opposite side use it. The Russians use it. I think the Chinese use it. Everybody uses a 9mm. Why? It's a great round. It is fantastic. It strikes a great balance between, let's say, effective power and shootability. It's great for that. It's very common. The magazines are very common. Whether they're Glock or Magpul or Amen 2, tons of good, affordable magazines. They're easy to find as far as pistol magazines go. They're good for that, right? The parts, they tend to run, first of all, a long time without parts failures. Now, not always. An extractor can break on round 1 or round 10,000, but they tend to go a long time without parts breakages. You are supposed to, depending on the generation, exchange the main spring, the recoil spring, every couple of thousand rounds. That being said, most people never do, and they're fine. But you are supposed to change those out. That is a part that wears out and is supposed to be changed, like changing your oil. Again, most people don't, and they'll still run, which is a testament to how well they're built. Parts are fairly common. So if you have your Glock 17 that you love, and the extractor does break or the trigger spring does break, you could probably find an older Glock and take apart and salvage a part out of somebody else's broken Glock or a Glock that got shot or whatever the case may be. So there is that commonality of parts there. It's probably one of the most common. I would still recommend you do the same thing. Get some kind of small container with extra trigger spring, extra front sight, extra extractor, things like that. They're so lightweight and so handy. You don't want to have to go scrounging for one if you could just have it. They weigh very, very little. Just have some extras on hand. But a good solid choice, right? A good solid choice. Now let's talk about some of the cons. They have a piano they have a trigger like dragging a piano down a gravel road. It is mushy, it is gritty, you never know when it's going to snap or break. It is just bleh. The triggers are just lackluster, mediocre at best, right? And you could say, yeah, but they make all kinds of great aftermarket triggers, and they do, but then you're getting rid of one of the big advantages of the commonality of parts. So there's that. Also, and this is probably not a big deal, but the sights, the ones that come on them, they're not great. You're probably going to be changing out the sights on there, and on sights, I didn't mention on 1911 because most people that are going to run that, it's the old school option. They're probably going to run irons, but you may want to run an optic if you're moving into the more modern handguns. For factory options, I think that the Glock factory optics mounting system is kind of an afterthought. They kind of threw it together. I'm not very impressed with any of the plates and mounting options and the size of the screws. I'm just not. I think it's not a very well thought out design. I think they kind of said, instead of redesigning the slide and everything, they said, how can we take this Glock and put an optic on there? Instead of thinking, how's the best way we can engineer this gun for an optic? So I'm not a big fan of their optics mounting system. I don't know that I would trust it. If I was going to go that route, I would custom mill the slide for the direct optic that I wanted, which is, again, not a huge deal. That's what I did with my SIG 226, which is kind of my gold medal carry gun. But anyway, there's that. But all in all, the Glock is a solid choice. And then talking about the Glocks, let's lump in, and they'll have to be compared to Glocks, right? All of the modern striker fire polymer soup du jour, right? Polymer striker fire of the day. The next big one in the room is going to be your SIG 320, M17, M18. Good choice. It's the military's new choice. So the farther we go down this road, the more common those are going to be. And they're still very common, right? There's even quite a few aftermarket magazine manufacturers. They're not as common as Glocks, but they are quickly gaining steam. And since the military adopted that as their standard handgun, it's only going to, I think, for the foreseeable probably a couple of decades, continue to grow and be more popular. The big advantage over this is the modularity. Now, I don't know that this really has any relevance, because if it's the apocalypse, you're probably not carrying like a rollout bag where you roll it on the table and you're like, what do I want to shoot zombies with today, right? I want the super long slide. I'm feeling long rangey today, and I'm going to conceal carry inside the cannibal camp where I'm trying to make it through. So I'm going to go super subcompact slide and frame and tuck it into my waistband, right? You're probably not doing that. You probably have your go-to. Like, you probably have your M17 or your M18. So the modularity there, kind of like with the military, I think is a moot point and way overblown. That being said, it does have that ability. Some of the downsides, if you look at the moving parts, even just like the striker assembly, I think it's far more complex than the Glock, which is a demerit to me, right? One of the great things about the Glock, and one of the reasons I have to believe that it's really reliable, is it's so simple. Look at the number of moving parts in a Glock, let's say 19, versus a 1911. Far fewer. I think that the M17 is a little bit more complex, which I think is, for this scenario, not as great. One of the other big positives over the Glock, however, it has a better trigger. It just does. It's not a 1911 trigger, but it's like, let's say, 50% of the way in between a 1911 and a Glock 19. It's a good trigger, measured against anything besides a 1911. For a striker-fired handgun, it is really, really good. I don't know if it's the best, but it's far better than the Glock. So you got that. You got that shootability. Also, you can get them with a safety if you want them with a safety. So, if you want a gun with a safety, they're readily available with that. Anyway, that's the M17. My other big one that I really like is the Smith & Wesson M&P. In my opinion, in my experience, they are as reliable as Glock. And I know people are going to disagree, but I think the M&P is absolutely as reliable as a Glock. I have won more shooting competitions with a Smith & Wesson M&P than any other handgun by far. I switched from a Glock to an M&P. I think the ergonomics are far better. I think even for most people, even that shoot Glocks, if they really shot both, they'd have to admit that the Smith & Wesson M&P has better ergonomics, right? So just right out of the box, just better ergonomics. They're much more like a polymer striker fire 1911. They're much more linear like that than going from that to a Glock. So better grip angle, I think, for most people. They do, although they usually coat them in black, they do have a good stainless steel slide, so that's something. They generally come, just the fit and finish on them is great, and they're made in America. So if you still want to be, about supporting America after America has ceased to be a nation, then they are made in America. I like that about them. But the Smith & Wesson M&P, absolutely a solid choice. Talking about simplicity, I think they're every bit as, I'd say they're 90% as simple as the Glock. I guess I can't say every bit. I think that the lower half, meaning the receiver and all of that, the grip frame, whatever you want to call it, I think that's a better design, and I think Glock has a little bit better design on the upper slide assembly and all the parts that fit into there, because they can be a lot more easily disassembled. The Smith & Wesson M&P, you kind of need a roll punch to take out the extractor. That being said, all the rounds that I've ever shot, even in my go-to competition M&P, they use like a tool steel, way beefier extractor than most handguns. I've never even had to replace one, and I've put crazy round counts through them. But if you did, it's a lot easier to take an extractor out of a Glock. So there's that, some kind of the pros and cons, and I'm not going to go over every polymer plastic fantastic out there, because you could literally do an entire podcast for years on the polymer striker fire du jour. Right, what's the next hot one? Now, let us talk about another, maybe unconventional choice, and that is going to be the 22. Why would you choose a 22 handgun for the apocalypse, right? Well, the same reason, one of the big main reasons that you would choose it for the long gun we talked about, the lightweight ammo. Right? And this, again, if you're talking this is your plan B, this is your backup tool. So you can have your main battle implement and then throw an additional 1,000 rounds of your 22 in your kit. And that's a big plus. And again, it's your backup tool. Is 22 reliable as far as ammo goes? No, not as much as most center fires. But what are the chances, the odds, right, that you are going to have a malfunction on your, let's say, AR, and you're going to transition to your handgun to get out of that certain situation until you can fix your long gun, right? So you do a transition, long gun to handgun, which you should practice dry fire, by the way. You have a malfunction with your AR, and then you transition, and you have a malfunction that just happens to be the 1, 2, or 3 rounds in your handgun that has a malfunction. I think that's so unlikely as to not be a concern. If that's your primary gun, then yeah, that probably should be a factor. But if you're talking about your secondary gun, the odds of both of them having a malfunction back to back, it's just low, right? So really not an issue there. And if you have your go-to long gun of choice, you might choose the 22 handgun. Especially, we talked about the big bore battle rifles, right? They're pigs. Like the FAL, the FN FAL, things like that. They're big, heavy guns. The ammo is big and heavy. So if that's your go-to gun, you may want to pick a 22 as your sidearm, because it's light and the ammo is light and you can carry a lot of it. Also, if you're carrying a full-size battle rifle, you probably don't want to shoot small game with that. And although most people, I think, are not going to have the ability to shoot small game with a .22 handgun, if you're really good, then you can. Especially if you're trapping. If it's caught in a trap, you should be able to hit it, right? You pretty much go up for a contact shot. So you have the ability to take out a lot of small game. It is an effective killer. Plenty of people have been killed with a .22 long rifle. So you have that. So there's a lot of utility there. Also, if you have a shotgun, if you carrying, like, that's my go-to pick is the shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun. That ammo is heavy. I might pair that, although I probably wouldn't, but there's a lot of merit in pairing that with a .22 handgun, right? There's a lot to that, because now I have the ability to stockpile or to have on me a brick of 500 rounds. And that's going to last me a long time if that's my secondary gun, and it doesn't weigh a lot. So that might be a great choice. Also, and kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum for that, I might choose it for commonality of ammo. Let's say that my go-to gun, I've chosen to take the Ruger 10/22 takedown because I plan on walking from, Toledo, Ohio to my Aunt Margaret's farm in very rural West Virginia. And I'm gonna hoof it because gasoline, unlike the post-apocalyptic shows, doesn't last very long. It goes bad very quickly, and we're past that point. So I'm hoofing it, right? I am walking from Ohio to West Virginia, and I want to get there and cover ground before winter. So I've decided to take my Ruger 10/22 takedown. And commonality of ammo, I may want to take a .22 handgun for a backup because it takes the same ammo and I can carry a lot of it. And if for some rare occurrence that my Ruger 10/22 goes down, it's lost, I go tumbling down an old coal mine or something, a slush bank, and I break or damage or something, my Ruger